Welcome to Crisis in Perception. We're a show that digs into the systems that shape our world, one book at a time. And today, wow, we are diving into a big one. Kristin Kobes Du Mez's Jesus and John Wayne. We're going to use it to unpack the structure of a pretty powerful modern religious and political identity system.
So let's rewind to January 2016. Donald Trump makes this wild claim. At the time, I think for most people, it sounded like pure hyperbole, just an absurd thing to say. But it actually hinted at a political reality that was about to leave a lot of people totally baffled.
Because, when all the votes were actually counted, a staggering 81% of white evangelicals had voted for him. Now, for folks on the outside, this was a huge puzzle. How could a community that calls itself the Family Values Group throw so much support behind a candidate with such a public, and let's face it, controversial personal history?
So, yeah, how was this possible? Well, this explainer, which is all based on Du Mez's incredible research, is going to show you that the answer isn't really about some sudden, isolated choice. It's not a moral contradiction. It's about system design.
See, the book's whole argument is that this wasn't some fluke or an accident. Nope. It was the totally predictable result of an identity system that was carefully built, piece by piece, over more than 50 years. It's a classic design problem, not some kind of individual moral failing.
So what is this system? Well, at its very core, it's a machine that basically fused together a very specific take on theology with this ideal of militant masculinity and, a strong dose of nationalist politics. It created a political identity that, for many, felt like a spiritual duty.
And this whole system really stands on a few key pillars. You've got this ideal of a tough, militant, aggressive masculinity. Then there's the defense of what's called family values, which really means hierarchical family structures. Add to that a heavy dose of Christian nationalism, this idea that America is God's chosen nation, and the engine driving it all, a massive consumer marketplace that sold this identity to millions.
And that's the key. This identity, it wasn't just something you heard about in church on Sunday. Oh no, it was sold as a brand. You can think of the whole system like a brand ecosystem where every single product, we're talking books, music, media, conferences, all of it had to reinforce that core identity.
This gave rise to something Du Mez calls cultural evangelicalism, basically an identity that was shaped more by the Christian products people were buying and consuming every day than by any specific theological idea. I mean, think about it. A few words on a Sunday morning just can't compete with a 24/7 diet of carefully curated media.
Now, the system didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was built over decades, often in reaction to big cultural shifts. Back in the 50s, during the Cold War, you had Billy Graham tying faith directly to national security. Fast forward to the 70s, and in response to feminism and the civil rights movement, you see the rise of family values politics, all about defending a patriarchal social order. Then in the 90s, you get movements like Promise Keepers, which kind of repackage this aggressive masculinity for a whole new generation of spiritual warriors.
And this brings us right to the core metaphor of the book, right in the title. The actor John Wayne, rugged, tough, a guy who wasn't really held back by traditional Christian virtues like gentleness or humility, he became the icon, the heroic ideal of this new Christian manhood. He was the guy who'd do whatever it took to protect his own, even if that meant breaking a few rules.
So, the really crucial point here is that this massive brand ecosystem, the publishing houses, the huge radio empires like James Dobson's Focus on the Family, all the political organizations, it all worked together to create this incredible loyalty and constantly reinforce this very specific, very militant worldview.
Okay, so after decades and decades of people consuming this very specific brand of tough, militant, protective masculinity, the system was just perfectly primed. It was ready for a very particular kind of leader. You could say all the incentives were pointing in exactly the same direction.
The system created a demand, right? But not for a moral role model, not for a saint. No, it created a demand for a strong man. What people were looking for was a fighter, a protector, someone who wasn't afraid to get their hands dirty, to defend their values and their vision for America.
And Donald Trump, by just perfectly embodying this aggressive, rule-breaking masculinity, he met the exact demand the system had been building for 50 years. You see, he wasn't a bug in the system, he was its most logical feature. He was the champion that this entire culture had been waiting for.
So what looked to everybody on the outside like a really shocking contradiction was actually, from inside the system, a deeply consistent outcome. It all makes sense when you look at the system's incentive architecture, the whole set of rewards and pressures that shape how people behave. This wasn't a departure from past values, it was the absolute culmination of a brand identity built over generations.
What this research really shows is just how powerful these identity systems can be in organizing how we see the world, making things that seem totally irrational feel, well, inevitable. And it leaves all of us with a really critical question. What are the hidden systems that are shaping your views? If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please do like and subscribe. And for a much longer, audio-based analysis of this, you should definitely check out the deep dive we've linked in the description below.